Thank you for joining us this evening. I am Jennifer Dye. I'm a librarian at Detroit Public Library. We've had a very strong program with the League of Women Voters Detroit for close to 2 years now. We present on issues of concern to Michigan voters about 10 months of the year. You were brought into this program muted. Please put any questions into the chat. Ruth Coolwine will capture these questions and ask them at the end of the presentation. We might be able to allow people to unmute at the end to ask questions directly if time allows. This presentation will be recorded and it will be made available on DPL's and the Detroit League's websites. Cheryl Bukoff of the League of Women Voters, the Detroit chapter of the League of Women Voters, will speak briefly about the chapter and the League.
Thank you. I'm a replacement tonight. So anyway, we the League are as you all probably know, many of your names I know out there who know the League, but we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan political organization with national, state, and local components. For a century, we have worked to empower voters by informing citizens about local candidates, public policy, and advocacy programs. We encourage active participation in the political process. The League does not endorse or support candidates or political parties. We conduct candidate forums, register voters, hold informational meetings, and advocate for voters' rights. Our goal is to have elected officials represent our entire community, not just a few. We work to ensure each and every vote is counted, and that the voting systems are fair, free, and accessible to all. We invite you to join us as we make democracy work in our communities. The League of Women Voters is open to new members who share our ideals. We work to engage Detroit, Hamtramck, Highland Park citizens in local governance, decision-making, and issues of interest. Our membership is open to everyone, 16 and older, men and women. We seek diversity, equity, and inclusion in all our endeavors. So join us because you can be a force for change for your community, yourself, and your country. Remember, democracy is not a spectator sport. And there will be information about the League in the chat at some point a little later. But thank you very much. We're very pleased to have all of you join us, and definitely pleased to have our speaker back.
Yes, thank you. Our speaker tonight is Eric Lupher. He is president of the Citizens Research Council of Michigan. He spoke to us in the spring about the various petitions for ballot proposals. That number has been winnowed down a bit, and he will talk to us now about the proposals that will be on the ballot. The Citizens Research Council of Michigan is an organization founded in 1916 to devote continuing attention to state and local government affairs. So now for more than 100 years, the goal of the Citizens Research Council has been to provide tools to the citizens of Michigan to secure good state and local government, governments that are responsible and accountable to the public, adopt sound public policies, and make effective and efficient use of resources in carrying out their responsibilities. The Citizens Research Council does not lobby, support candidates for public office, or take positions on ballot questions. It has a long history of analyzing initiatives and referendums on the statewide ballot so voters can make informed decisions on their votes. Eric Lupher has been president of the organization since 2014. He has been on the Research Council since 1987, the first 2 years as an intern. And since then as a research associate. I'm winnowing this down, I'm sorry, on the fly. And he's now president of the organization. During this span, he has done studies on many different state and local government policy issues. Much of his work over the past couple of years has concentrated on local government issues, including government finance, organization, service provision, and the consolidation of local governments. Please welcome Eric Lupher tonight.
Thank you, Jennifer. I always put this slide up as I introduce myself, and you did such a wonderful job. We can get right to the program. As Jennifer said, we have a long history of looking at the initiatives. We see our role as educating policymakers, providing information for more informed votes on policy. And in the case of constitutional amendments, we the people are the policymakers. So I encourage you to go to our website, crcmich.org. You can find these reports on the front page or dig into the research. And if you want to stay plugged into the work we do, if you text Facts Matter to 42828, you can join our email list and keep up to date with everything we do. So, as Jennifer said, I was with you in the spring and we walked through what looked like it was going to be a very busy election season as it relates to the bottom of the ballot, all the initiatives and constitutional amendments being proposed. And as you can see by the number that are crossed out here, we winnowed that list down to 3. So I'm going to walk through those with you today. So, Proposal 1 is they're all constitutional amendments. Let me put that out there right now. Proposal 1 is a constitutional amendments to change the way we do term limits for our legislative branch and to create financial disclosure rules for all statewide elected officials. So let's walk through that. Right now, we have legislative term limits. It's 3 terms in the House or 2 terms in the Senate. That comes out to 6 years you can serve in the House or 8 years you can serve in the Senate. And what's being proposed is to change that from terms to years. So instead of 3 terms or 2 terms, you can have 12 years as a legislator to use any way you want. You can use them all in the House, you can use them all in the Senate, or you can mix and match, serve in one chamber, then move to the other if that's how you want to do it. So why is this significant? We think based on watching how people have used term limits for 30 years in Michigan and looking at other states that have gone before us with this change similar to what's being proposed in Michigan, we think legislators are going to pick the House and the Senate and stay there for their 12 years, less jumping between chambers as we've seen that. So as we started to dig into this question, we had a few cool items that we wanted to dig into. First of all, right now, 6 + 8 is 14. You can serve 14 years as a legislator. What's being proposed for 12? Is that a reduction in the amount of time? Is it an increase in the amount of time? So we went through, created a database of everyone that served in the 30 years we've had term limits. That's 737 people. 675 have served as representatives, and 60% of them have served the full 3 terms. 160 have served as senators, 2/3 of those have served the full 2 terms. And as I said, we currently see jumping between the 2 chambers. So most senators were representatives first. And we were able to identify 43% of the senators. 61% of the senators were representatives first. And of those 42, 42 out of the 737 have served the full 3 years, 3 terms in the House, 2 terms in the Senate, so 14 years. So for 6% of if we use the past as indication of the future, for 6% of the legislature, this would feel like a reduction in the amount of time they can serve as a legislator. Another 5% have served 12 years, 2 terms in the House, 2 terms in the Senate. So they would be maxing out. This would be no reduction. The other 89% of the legislators, looking backwards, they still have eligibility. Looking forward, we would think that they would probably not even serve the full 12 years that are available to them. It's all up to the people whether they want to reelect them to come back and serve. Another question we had was, how does this compare? We know that Michigan's not the only state with term limits. How does what's being proposed for Michigan compare to the other states? Well, the thing you need to know, Michigan currently has the strictest chamber limits of any of the 15 states with term limits. You can see there's some above us with 8 or 12. There's some below us with 16 or 24 years. Really, those, as we'll discuss, they have the amount of time, or if you're 16 years, you can be 8 years in the House or 8 years in the Senate. So more lax. Michigan, because we've created these chamber limits, the only thing that compares to us is Nebraska. They, of course, have a unicameral legislature. So they're equal to us in the Senate, but nobody has as strict limits in the House. The other thing you need to know is that in the early 1990s, California in 1990, Arkansas and Michigan in 1992, 3 states adopted a model of term limits that looks exactly like Michigan has now. It wasn't long after that that we started to see the problems that are identified in Michigan, and I'll walk through some of those. We started to see those in California and Arkansas as well. So California in 2012 acted to make the change that's being proposed in Michigan. They told the candidates for the legislature, you have 12 years, use them any way you want. Arkansas followed 2 years after that and made it 16 years. They can do anything they want, any chamber. And 6 years after that, they decided 16 years is contrary to the intention why they adopted term limits in the first place. So they changed it again to make it 12 years, just like we're talking about in Michigan. The only difference in Arkansas now, you can serve 12 years, go away for 2 years and become eligible to start serving again. Pretty much the same thing. So 2 states that had models that looked just like Michigan, and they both decided that it wasn't working, it was too strict, and they needed to do something. So the third question we ask is, what were we trying to accomplish with term limits, and did we have any success with that? So the goals of term limits, as espoused 30 years ago, were that they were going to restore accountability. The idea is sort of the Jeffersonian model of democracy, that people would be citizens, come and serve their time as a legislator, and then go back to becoming a citizen and live under the laws that they enacted. Well, we do in fact see that in Michigan. We have created a rotation of legislators. We force people out. Some choose not to run again after 2 or 4 years, or they don't get reelected after 2 or 4 years. But we have created this rotation. The issue we identified, though, as we started looking into this, is Michigan has had pretty strong gerrymandering for the whole time we've had term limits. Gerrymandering, the idea that the party in charge will draw the legislative districts or congressional districts to favor their party. What we've seen in Michigan, they've created districts that are safe for the Republican Party, safe for the Democratic Party, very few competitive districts. So even though we've had this rotation and new people coming in, we've had very little rotation in different ways of thinking about public policy, safe Republican districts or safe. They tried to create a restoration of electoral competition. So again, we've created turnover, increased opportunities for run for office. The problem is, if you have an incumbent, somebody will get elected, they're an incumbent for the next 2 elections. Very infrequently do you get anybody running against them in the primary, and even in a general election, maybe tepid enthusiasm to run against those people. And then when they're tournamented out, you have an open seat. Often the political parties play a strong role in identifying a favored candidate and helping that person to get to the election. So there is more turnover, more opportunity for competition. I just don't think we've seen it in our model of term limits. They wanted to reduce the influence of special interests, the lobbyists. They have in some ways done that, because now the lobbyist job is harder. They have to keep meeting the new legislators, educating about their issues. But at the same time, we have taken out the institutional knowledge from the legislature, those people that had been around for a long time and knew their issues really well. They were kind of the target of term limits. So on the one hand, we've created turnover and rotation. On the other hand, we've taken those people who knew the system well and knew their issues well and pushed them out. And so the lobbyists have supplanted them, and now they're the institutional knowledge and the ones that understand. And finally, they wanted to increase diversity, create more opportunities for women and minorities to serve in the legislature. We in fact see that. If you can go through what we've seen in the last 30 years, we do see more women and more minorities. I'm just not sure it's because of term limits that we see that. If you look around you, we of course see women leading businesses, women in leadership roles in civic organizations. And if you look at other states or the federal government, we see more diversity. So is it because we've had term limits? So in any case, you can make the case the goals of term limits have been met, those that were offered 30 years ago. Why would we want to change them? The proponents of this amendment argue that because the way the system is set up, it has really created a focus on electioneering. By the time somebody gets elected, before they step foot into their office in Lansing on the first day, the party leadership is asking them, what is their goal? Do they want to go from the House to the Senate? So the idea that they would become a citizen legislator is sort of out the door, that they really, the fact that they're electable, the parties try to capitalize on that. And we see that it's taken time away from meeting in the district. It's lessened even the knowledge that the legislature is supposed to be engaging in executive branch oversight, let alone the activities to carry that out. And as I said, we have fewer legislators that have real issue knowledge, matter knowledge on whatever it is, taxation, insurance, whatever. It's just really hard for them to gain the knowledge in a short amount of time before they're pushed on to the next position, wherever that may be. Arguably, it's created an unwillingness to tackle difficult political issues. We see either decisions being made where the policy created doesn't take effect until after that class of legislators is term limited out. We saw this in 2015 when they finally did something about funding the roads, but a key part of that didn't take effect until 2021, coincidentally 6 years after the decision was made, and 6 years is enough time for that class of legislators to term limit out and the next class have to worry about it. And sometimes they're just not deciding at all. They can't create the political will to take something up because they know they're going to have to campaign with that hanging over their head. And finally, they argue that our model of term limits has weakened the chamber leadership. That we have a Speaker of the House that is serving after 2 terms, 4 years of experience. And likewise, the minority party. We have the same problem in the Senate, that somebody serves 1 4-year term, and then rises to the Senate majority leader. Fortunately, most of those people have served in the House before they become senators, but it's still the same thing. So the Speaker of the House, the Senate majority leader are really key to balancing the power with the executive branch, and we've weakened them through term limits. And at the same time, their focus seems to have changed. Those people close to Lansing, close to how things work, find that those positions are spending more and more time on fundraising for the rank and file members and not really focused on the policy issues that we elected them to figure out in the first place. So that's the argument the proponents make. The opponents say things are working, it's doing what it's meant to do. Being a legislator isn't a rocket scientist. People coming into the position have the knowledge and can tackle these things. The other part of this is financial disclosure. It affects our state elected officials, the governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, attorney general, all members of the House and the Senate. It requires the legislature to enact a law to provide financial disclosure. The law has to, this has to require that all those people provide a list of their assets, their sources of income, their liabilities, the positions held, if they held sit on a corporate board, a not-for-profit, anything like that. Do they have arrangements for future employment? So we're going to try to head off, or at least provide transparency on the revolving door to go from a legislator to a lobbyist the next day, or other positions. Any gifts they receive while serving, payments made, reimbursements received for travel, and sometimes instead of those people getting money directly, they'll direct the payments to a charity. So let's know about that. So the idea is here to create more transparency, shine a greater light on the compensation of these people and the assets they held. Are they making decisions for the state's best interest, or is it for their own best interest? The only way we can know that is by making this information available, so the media and we as citizens can look into that. Is this new? Michigan is one of only 2 states that don't have a law like this. The other 48 do. Michigan's legislature has long had the ability to do this. We don't need a constitutional amendment telling them to do it. This proposal started off as a petition effort, and as they were putting all this together, they decided that term limits is popular with the people. So if it's just a change in term limits, they might not get the votes they want. So they packaged it together with this. And then just about the time they were ready to start circulating the petitions, they went to the legislature and got them to agree, put it on the ballot directly. So what this boils down to is our legislature, for the length of time we've been a state, has chosen not to address this issue, even though they have the authority to. Now they want you to vote on a constitutional amendment mandating that they do what they should have done in the first place. I think we can all agree that transparency is a good thing. Does it need to be in the Constitution? Could they do it anyways? So if you vote yes, we're going to change term limits. We're going to create these financial disclosure law. If you vote no, we will still have term limits. The legislature can still take up this issue and deal with it. So proposal 2 is promote the vote 2022. You might recall in 2018, we had promote the vote, and this is an extension of that. It clarifies some things and creates some new requirements. So first of all, you need to know that we, of course, had the 2020 election. A number of people feel like the election was stolen, that there were some sort of improprieties, that type of thing. Based on that, our Republican legislature proposed a law to tighten up the ability to register the vote, make it harder to get absentee ballots, do a number of things. Governor Whitmer vetoed that. They then took that same language, plugged it into a petition, initiated statute, and circulated that. They have the petition turned into the Board of State Canvassers, waiting for them to certify that the requisite number of signatures have been gathered. If so, they can turn that over to the legislature. They can act without threat of a veto. So that is the root of why we have this proposed constitutional amendment. Those who are against, don't think that the election was stolen and are against tightening up registering and absentee balloting, put this on the ballot. If it's a contest of constitutional provision versus statutory provision, the Constitution wins. One was a proposed statute, and they're trying to trump that with a constitutional amendment. The proposal deals with voter identification requirements, absentee voting, early in-person voting, post-election actions by our government officials. And let me walk through what some of those things are. First of all, it recognizes voting as a fundamental right. It has always been a fundamental right in the United States. Women, as of the 1920s, but it has always been a fundamental right. We are stating that affirmably through our Constitution. We had the controversy in the 2020 election. When does a ballot have to be received? And this clarifies that for any military overseas ballots to be counted, they have to be postmarked by election day. This year, that's November 8th, and received within 6 days of the election. Goes to great detail in our proposal for our state constitution to define what is a postmark, what is election day, a lot of detail. It will provide voters with the right to verify their identity with a signed statement if they cannot produce a government-issued identification, a driver's license, or some other government-issued identification. That goes again to the other proposal that said you need to either see an ID or the last 4 digits of a social security number. The point of the proponents, if you've already registered to vote, you've already shown your identification. This is just attesting that you are who you say you are. Require a new state-funded system for tracking submitted absentee applications and ballots, and include pre-paste postage for return of that application or the ballot. So it's sort of the Amazon system that once you place an order, that it has left the distribution house, it's on a truck, it's coming to your neighborhood soon. Here, you would be able to say they have received my application, a ballot has been issued, I sent the ballot back, they've received it. They would have to be able to tell you, you forgot to sign it, did something wrong, so you have the ability to rectify any problems that are identified. It goes on to require the state to fund at least one secure drop box in every city and township for the submission of absentee ballots. We, of course, have a number of communities that already have drop boxes. It would do that. The state would pay for each one if you need to replace that, I suppose. In a city like Detroit or other big cities, if population of more than 15,000, the state would pay for more than one. Through a formula, they would decide how many you're entitled. It would allow voters to request an absentee ballot for all future elections. Again, we see a number of city and township clerks already doing this. You put your name down, they know that you intend to do that. They say, you in fact want to vote absentee this time, and you send in the application. So the sort of permanent list that you would stay on. This is something new. It would require 9 days of in-person voting. So starting the second Saturday before the election, running the Sunday immediately before the election, each city and township would have to provide a place for people to come in. It would be just like your voting place, whether that's a church or elementary school or whatever it is. It would probably be at City Hall or the Township Hall. You'd be able to say, I would like to vote now. They would give you the appropriate ballot. You mark it up. They would have a place for you to go, and sort of the curtain around you, so only you see what you're voting on. You go back and feed it in the machine, and I suppose they'd give you your little sticker that says you voted. The issue is that's going to require personnel. We can assume that all cities and townships are properly staffed now. That's to do the chores that they have to do, and to add in a person that has to staff this, maybe two people that have to staff this for 9 days prior to the election. At the same time, they're trying to deal with absentee voting and preparing for the election itself. Will be a strain on those communities. It does say they can do it more than 9 days, and they can do. It does say they can do it in collaboration. So if two or more cities wanted to all come together and have a common place, they could do that someplace accessible to everyone. It requires the election audits to be conducted in public by state and county election officials, and based only on the established guidelines to promote accuracy and transparency. And it requires the canvassing boards to certify the election results based only on the records of the votes cast. So some of what we saw 2 years ago, that they went sort of fishing for things to reject the vote. The canvas on, it would hope to preclude some of that from happening anymore. So I walked through the Secure My Vote, why this is out there, things to think about. It creates cost. The state's going to have to create that the ballot tracking system. The state's going to have to pay for drop boxes. Local governments are going to have to pay for those 9 days of in-person voting. And it creates detail in our Constitution. If you think about the Constitution, it should be a fundamental document that creates the guidelines, provides your rights, and leaves it to the legislature to put the detail into that. This is taking that power away from the legislature, putting provisions in the Constitution. And at some point, if there's a better way of doing things that other states are coming up with, we will have to amend our Constitution, have another vote of the people to change that wording, and be able to fix it. And that brings us to Proposal 3. Proposal 3 is called the Reproductive Freedom for All. This, of course, is in wake of the U.S. Supreme Court decision in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. It said that the Roe decision that we've been living under for 50 years was wrongly adjudicated, and they said there isn't a fundamental right to abortion, can be inferred from our US Constitution. So abortion and reproductive rights are a state matter, and it's up to the states to figure out what you want to do about it. So Michigan has a law from 1846. It was recodified in 1931. That is among the strictest in the nation. It provides only for abortions to protect the health of the mother. And for those who are pro-choice, that's not good enough, and they proposed this constitutional amendment to, instead of fishing for the idea that you have that right, they want to overtly state it in our Constitution. The key thing the proposal does is define reproductive freedom, and they say that is the right to make and effectuate decisions about all matters related to pregnancy. That is something bigger than just the idea of abortion. It includes services such as, it could be something more than this, but services such as prenatal care, childbirth, postpartum care, contraception, sterilization, abortion, miscarriage management, and infertility. The proposal would define the reproductive freedom as a fundamental right, and in the world of jurisprudence, this means it is a sort of a right above all others, comparable to freedom of speech, right to marry. And in doing so, it would say the legislature must have a really good reason to want to infringe on that right, and whatever cure they come up with for the problem they see has to be very specific to the problem identified. So whereas the Roe decision defined a certain number of weeks within which an abortion can take place, and in the, if you listen to the arguments and leading to the Dobbs decision, if you listen to what other states are doing, they're all based on number of weeks. This proposed amendment doesn't define a set amount of weeks, but says it is up to the healthcare professionals to determine fetal viability. That is there an ability of the baby to survive outside of the uterus? As long as that baby is not viable, then the reproductive freedom is up to the mother and the healthcare professional to decide what's best for them. And the state must have a compelling state interest to infringe on that right. Any laws, regulations, or actions must be the least restrictive means to accomplish that state interest. After that period of time, when healthcare professionals deem that there's the ability of the baby to survive outside of the uterus, then the state has more ability to regulate reproductive care. It's not prohibited from restricting the access to abortion, protecting the health of the mother, and so on. So we have seen in the past as well arguments why Roe should be pulled back. Many states use the argument that the baby in the uterus has rights, and this amendment would make clear that it is the health of the mother, as indicated by the health professional, that matters, that the state cannot use that argument of the baby and the fetus as the key argument. It goes through a number of provisions. Any laws enacted cannot be discriminatory. The healthcare professionals are protected against prosecution, and the mothers, in fact, seeking an abortion are protected against prosecution. The ideas of the compelling state interest that we discussed in the fetal viability. And it says that the constitutional amendment will be self-executing. So we're not looking for the legislature to pass a law as like we are with proposal 1. This constitutional amendment will stand by itself. And if it in any way is found in violation of the US Constitution, it's severable. So you can carve out whatever doesn't fit in the overall issue will continue. You have probably seen lawn signs and TV commercials saying that there's a lot of ambiguity here, and we go through in our paper, and this is kind of small font, but that's in fact the case, that the lawyers are going to have to take a number of things to court to figure out when they talk about individual rights, does that apply to people 18? What type of services are related to pregnancy? They list many of the most obvious, but what else is there? It says that the physical and mental health conditions are have to play the leading. So what justifies is physical or mental conditions that would warrant an abortion. State can't discriminate. Does that mean that the ban on public funding for abortions would qualify as discriminatory? The state shall not penalize or prosecute. What constitutes an adverse action? So there's a number of issues to the way this is worded that we're going to have to figure things out. So you want to know if you vote one way or the other, what happens next. So in our paper, we lay out 3 different scenarios that really will be the deciding factors here. Before I jump into those, you need to know that the governor's office and Planned Parenthood, when the Dobbs decision was handed down, immediately went to the courts, filed 2 different cases trying to ask the Michigan Supreme Court to find that there's an implicit right to abortion in the Michigan Constitution. That has been acted on by lower courts, but not yet taken up by the Michigan Supreme Court. So the first scenario is proposal 3 is rejected on November 8th. And the state Supreme Court does not find an implicit right to an abortion. So in that case, that 1931 law that recodified the 1846 provisions would be the law in the state. It would be up to the courts to decide how that almost 100-year-old law applies to the world we live in today, applies to the ability to abort with a pill. You sort of do that yourself without needing to go and have a medical procedure. There's a lot of issues that have to be figured out. The legislature, of course, could act on that law. And the problem we see with that is Michigan is, a rather purple state, fairly equal number of Republican and Democrats, and we've certainly seen the governor's office, also seen the House and the new Voters Not Politicians, the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. We don't know how that will play out, but the idea is if our legislature acts on it in 2023, will the next legislature in 2027 undo that and move us the other way? And then in 2033, pull it back, the first way and so on. So it could get very complicated. The way the law is currently written, there's a 6-year statute of limitations. So healthcare professionals might, even though it's legal, might have some trepidation about acting lest they get prosecuted sometime down the road. So that's the first scenario. The second is that proposal 3 is adopted by the voters. It would create an explicit right to an abortion, as well as all the other services. Again, like I said, there's a lot of issues that'll have to be sorted out, and we'll have a number of cases brought up before our courts to try to clarify what some of those provisions mean. In the third scenario is proposal 3 is rejected by the voters, but our state Supreme Court doesn't find an implicit right to an abortion. And then we'll have to either look at the case that decides that or have a number of follow-up cases, again, trying to decide what exactly are the rights, how do current laws apply, the ban on public funding, the need for parental consent, all those types of things. So we will be dealing with this for many years, regardless of which of these 3 scenarios play out. So there's 3 proposals in a little more than half an hour. Ruth, I'm interested in what sort of issues I brought up that people have raised questions on.
Hi, Eric. Thank you so much. So the question we have here, the first one is, if a person wanted to change the law that allows the legislature to enact a new law based on a petition, would that need to be a constitutional amendment proposal or a legislative amendment proposal? And I think within that, if you could just explain briefly the difference between those.
Right. So our state constitution is the fundamental law of the state. It creates our 3 different branches of government. It defines how many legislators we have, the powers of the governor, sort of a detail on how policy will be made, creates our local governments and our university system, the fundamentals of our system of taxation. And as was written in the 1960s, it would say we're going to have a system of city government, and it's up to the legislature to say what that would look like as enacted by a law. So we have the Constitution that creates the fundamental system, provides your rights, number of rights piggyback on our federal rights, and others are particular to our state. And then within that, we have then codified law over the length of our history as a state that defines just about every aspect of government, our legal system, our penal system, our drain code, and everything else. So constitutional fundamental right, statute, all the details to make government go. The 3 proposals we have before us today are all constitutional amendments. They want to put these provisions into the Constitution, and the only way to fix them, undo them, fine-tune them is by another constitutional amendment. That can happen either by the legislature recognizing that there's a problem in submitting a proposal, or the people circulating petitions trying to get the requisite number of signatures to qualify for the ballot. In any case, a constitutional amendment does not take effect until the people vote on it, and the majority of the people that do vote say that they want that to take place. It is a fairly difficult process, not only collecting the number of signatures, but also the campaigns. Turn on the TV today, once you get past the campaigns for governor and your congressman and dog catcher, then they've got all these ads, and the campaigns for public persuasion are an expensive effort. We would rather most things be done by the legislature. That's why we elect them to deal with these things. But in this day of age, with the hyper-partisan world we live in, there's either a lack of trust that they're going to do it the way that half the state wants them to do, or that whatever they do will be undone down the road. And so putting in the Constitution provides more permanency.
Thank you. And if someone wanted to change the legislature's ability to adopt an petition that's circulating and change it and pass it, what level of law is that? Would it have to be in the constitutional level, a constitutional amendment?
So I take it from that question that they're referring to the law that's being proposed related to Proposal 2, the ability to circulate a petition and submit it to the legislature for enactment without the ability of the governor to act on that. Once the petitions are submitted to the Board of State Canvassers, there is no ability to amend it. Well, so there's no immediate ability to amend it. The legislature has to vote on that as submitted. They can't amend it. Having adopted it, suppose they do enact it, it can be amended after the fact. There's a question from 2018 related to paid sick time and minimum wage, where the legislature enacted it and then immediately amended it. And so we're asking the courts to say, was that fair? They acted counter to the will of the proponents of the petition. But it really speaks to the point that it can be amended. You just don't know starting when.
Thanks. There's another question about the pending proposal you mentioned, and within the proposal 2, that has submitted signatures but hasn't necessarily gone through the validation process yet. What would happen if that secure my vote pending proposal passes, or passes that inspection?
Yeah. So as I said, when it's a competition between a constitutional amendment and a statutory change, the constitutional amendment wins. Constitution trumps statute. Anytime those are in conflict, the statute will win. So it's not clear when the Board of Canvassers will act on the petitions. If the Bureau of Elections does their work and is satisfied that there's requisite number, will they get it to the legislature to act on before Election Day or 4 weeks out? That doesn't seem plausible at this point. And after the fact, if this Proposal 2 is adopted by the voters, there will be no need for the legislature to take up that question. There'll be a moot point at that.
Thank you. Another question is about where we might be able to find more information on how you've arrived at your analyses. Do you have on your website places where folks can review your sources and your work?
Yeah, as I said, share this other. So this is our website, and you can scroll down. So all 3 proposals are immediately available, and we have citations in there. If we found information from someplace and we want to make sure you know where we found that information, you can look at the footnotes and endnotes and follow along. This is all at crcmich.org.
Those are the end of the written questions. If I don't know, Jennifer, if you'd like to open it up to others.
Yes, would anyone else like to ask a question? If you would like to ask it verbally, go down to reactions and raise your hand. Anything else in that you'd like put in chat? It looks like we don't have more questions. Definitely go to crcmich.org. There's a lot of good information there. Thank you, Eric. Wonderful and useful talk as always.
Jennifer,
And
Cheryl has raised her hand.
looks
You
like we
wanna-
have
Cheryl
a
just raised her
question.
hand. Okay, Cheryl. You should be able to unmute.
Thank you. Am I unmuted?
We can hear
Yes.
you.
Okay. I have so many questions, so I'm sure I can only ask one, but still, others I'm sure have more. It raises so many issues, these three, that I didn't even totally understand before. So I really appreciate the sharing. One of the questions on transparency is, I realized in something else I read before, and even in what you're saying too, it really is, we're never going to find out what are the assets, you know, how much money they have or how much debt or any of that. It's only where the assets are coming from, isn't that it? And
Well,
do we
so-
even need to know it? What's more important to know?
Yeah. So this constitutional mandate would set a minimum of what the what the legislature has to enact. It doesn't create a maximum. So the legislature could always go beyond the constitutional provision and do something similar to what's required of Congress. The part that transparency is good, we can all agree as observers of government, we want transparency. We want to know that they're not self-serving and why they're making the laws they are. Trying to thread the needle though, because if you, on something like this, if you're looking for too much transparency, then you might dissuade good people from running for office. Because now, you know, whole life is open for everybody to look into and know how much money they have and what is it. So I don't have the answer for what the right amount of transparency, financial disclosure is. I would just say, just because constitutional mandate says we need to know the sources of income, doesn't mean the legislature could say the sources and the amount of income. That's their prerogative. Good lobbying might get you there.
Thanks.
Are there any more questions right now? Well, thank you everyone for attending. I'm putting a few links in here, including my email address. If you want to, the DetroitPublicLibrary.org and the League as well. Let's see. Actually, it's not displaying well, but the LWVDetroit.org. We have these meetings most months. We are having some trouble with our plans for November, and we're working on that. We're tentatively planning that for the 15th, because the second Tuesday of the month is election day, and we don't want to interfere with that. I also do the astronomy programs here, and here is a link to our program Shoot the Moon on taking photographs of the moon without just getting a big blob, which is what tends to happen. And this video, it will take a couple of weeks, as I'm told by marketing. Let me see. There. Should be available on our YouTube channel. And I'm putting it in here. Thank you very much for attending. If you have anything that you would like us to deal with in the future, we are working on, Cheryl and Ruth meet with me frequently as we try to come up with topics that are useful and interesting. And that's one reason we keep coming to Eric, because he does such a great job and has such information. All right. Thank you. And good night. Good night.
for that?
Okay, let's get you on the screen share. Okay.
All right.
Oh, wait, I have to make you a host. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Very good.
Okay, can you share the screen now or?
Let's see if this works. Share screen.
So you gotta ask first, because they might not know. What a thrill.
Okay, that works then.
All right. Is that coming through?
No.
No, it's.
I see a black screen.
Not
Uh-oh.
yet.
Let's try this then. How about now?
There's one. I saw it flash quickly. One of them showed up.
It flashed
No.
really quick, but it flashed quick, but there's nothing there now.
Let's see here. I'm gonna unshare and reshare here.
Yeah, okay, that's what he's gonna do. He's gonna give it a shot.
Some advanced sharing options.
That part's coming up.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to see if I was not doing something right.
Oh no, it might be on my end. Is that coming through?
No.
No. it's
All
not.
right. We're gonna do this the old-fashioned way then.
There.
There.
Oh, I guess, I
Okay,
guess
there
that,
we go. Okay.
that works. Okay. Well, hey, I guess we
Now
can
we
roll
see
with
it.
this. Okay.
All right.
No.
I'm going to mute myself and I hope that everybody can mute themselves except for our speaker. Okay.
All right. And just to confirm that the title slide is up, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Okay.
Uh-oh, I heard a no.
No. Yes, there's a no here.
Uh-oh. It's
Yeah, I can see it. I can see our island jewel, Detroit's Belle Isle Park. I see
thanks,
it.
Jamon. Thank you. Okay. Well, all right. Well, thanks everybody. Yeah, sorry about it's always something new with Zoom. I swear there's always an update or something like that. It's really excited to be coming to you Zoom or otherwise though. It's you know, this was my my home library. This is probably the library I spent you know, the largest chunk of my life at. It's the old you know, main branch of the DPL. So it's really cool to get to do this. My name's Brendan Roney. I'm the manager of digital projects at the Detroit Historical Society. I've been at the Detroit Historical Society for about 16 years now in various capacities. These days, one of the things I spend a lot of my time with is working with our AP collection and with our photo and two-dimensional collection, scanning things and stuff like that. And one of the cool kind of outward facing things I get to do are these speakers bureaus. And this is one of our more popular ones, obviously. This is our island jewel, Detroit's Belle Isle Park. I'm betting a lot of folks here have great personal ties to the island. It's one of my favorite places. I used to work there every weekend. In my early days with the Detroit Historical Society over at the Dawson Great Lakes Museum, I've canoed the canals. I've had picnics there. I used to, I played Scrabble on the beach for some reason. I've got all kinds of fun there. And then memories going back to my childhood, to the old zoo and the playscape and the giant slide and stuff like that. And because Belle Isle was so beloved going way back, we have tons of great old postcards showing the island over the years, like the one in the background of this slide. This is a particularly great one for a couple reasons here. First of all, look who's in the scene. We've got women clad in those bulky turn of the century outfits rowing. In the 1890s, right around 1900, there wasn't that many sort of proper quote unquote athletic outlets that were available to women in those days. And things like cycling and rowing, and we'll get to cycling in a minute, were popular endeavors, and you know, Belle Isle, a great place to do both. We've got 4 women up on the bridge in the background, unchaperoned as far as we can tell right there, enjoying the time out on the island. Oh, I just realized my air's still going. I'm gonna kill that, so it's not causing any kind of audio interference there. Speaking of Belle Isle and air conditioning, great. When we didn't have that, that's where you went. So had those four women up on that bridge there had turned around, you'd get an interesting view. This is this particular bridge isn't one that's still standing. This is roughly behind where the casino is right now. I think there's just pretty modern looking green metal one there. And if they turned around and looked behind them, they're kind of beyond what we can see in the space, there'd be an adjacent bridge with a band shell on top that we'll see later in this presentation. If you look underneath the bridge, I don't know if my mouse pointer comes in here, but if you look just underneath the bridge, you see benches along the shore of the canal there where people could sit and listen to music from the adjacent band shell, or they could float in their canoes. This is also a really cool scene because the canoe in the center, if you're just kind of gently paddling by some friends, that's a not quite the position you have your paddle in. So they might be getting ready to splash one of their pals there, hopefully one of their pals. So kind of a nice playful scene on the canals of Belle Isle here. So let's jump into it, and we got to start somewhere. So let's start with, this plays along here. All right. One of the things the island's been known for up until, I guess, next year is as a home for world-class racing. Beginning back in 1992, Roger Penske of Penske Oil brought the Detroit Grand Prix onto the western end of the island. Previously, the race was held in downtown, but after regular complaints about viewing space and angles down there, the race was moved to Belle Isle. Setup during this period began generally around March. It was a bit later this year. And in the weeks leading up to the race, you can actually sort of test drive on the track. But mind you, those 15-mile-an-hour speed limits on Belle Isle are enforced pretty strictly these days. For 2023, the race is going to return back downtown. We'll see how well that's received, how they tackle the viewing angle issues and things like that. Now, of course, auto racing isn't the only kind of racing on and around Belle Isle. There's also powerboat racing. There's been a series of hydroplane races held on the Detroit River for over 100 years. It's been on hold the last couple of years, but the most recent incarnation of these races was the Detroit Hydro Fest. Prior to that, there's the Thunder Fest and the Harmsworth Cup Race and the Gold Cup Race. The Gold Cup is one of the oldest events in motorsports. It used to kind of be nomadic. Where the race would be held each year would be on the previous year's winner's home turf. So back in 1915, there was a boat called the Miss Detroit, which was funded by a group of Detroit businessmen to, kind of bring glory to the city and bring the trophy to the city in the race here. And it did just that. So beginning in 1916, the Miss Detroit brought the race here. In 1917, a guy by the name of Gar Wood came onto the scene, and he was one of the first kind of superstars of motorsports in the early 20th century. And he had a series of boats called the Miss America. We see the Miss America 10 in the image here. Gar Wood's on the left. That's Orland Johnson, his mechanic, on the right. They'd have a ride-in mechanic to tweak all those engines. There's 4 Packard engines powering this thing. And Gar Wood kept the Gold Cup in Detroit for a good number of years. Very colorful guy too, and kind of a multi-talented guy too. After his racing days, he went on to paint the compactors that were used in garbage trucks. So for a good long time, there was Gar Wood emblazoned on the back of a garbage truck. So kind of a weird way of honoring a guy, but hey, he invented the compactor, so why not? Or at least patented a version. So you don't need 4 fancy Packard engines or a fancy jet turbine engine to race around Belle Isle. There's also people-powered boats. The Detroit Boat Club isn't just the name of a building. The actual club is still in operation and has been since 1839, which makes it the oldest continuously operated rowing club in the United States. Sailboat racing is still a constant too. There's often races happening on the river and on Lake St. Clair. And of course, there's racing on foot, skates, bicycles, model boats. And if you really want to stretch the device here, you can race after baseballs and cricket balls and my favorite frisbees on Belle Isle. Sheila Young, the Olympic speed skater who took home the gold medal in the 1976 Winter Olympics, trained on Belle Isle's canals when they were frozen. And in the Summer Olympics, Sheila Young was an Olympic cyclist. And bicycle racing goes back to the 1880s and the 1890s on Belle Isle. A big bicycle race was held every year on Decoration Day, which was kind of the proto version of Memorial Day in the city. And it was a bit of a rivalry with Chicago, where the press would compare how elaborate the prizes for the winners of the bicycle races in each city were. And having the bicycle race on Decoration Day, just honoring Civil War soldiers, was kind of also controversial. It's kind of considered a bit frivolous too. So, but bicycle racing, long history there, and you know, plenty of cyclists out any given day on the island. The Detroit Free Press Marathon includes a lap around the island, as well as stretches along the Ambassador Bridge and through the Detroit Windsor Tunnel, making it the only international underwater marathon. One of my favorite things, the Model Yacht Basin, used to host regattas of boats built by Detroit public school kids. It was a shop class thing, industrial arts thing. You'd get a set of uniform plans, you'd build this model yacht that you'd rig up to interact with the wind to turn or go straight, and you'd race them with other school kids across the Model Yacht Basin. And the Model Yacht Basin's still there. You might have seen it, not known what it is. If you're taking the outer road, the Strand, along Belle Isle, once you go past, it's between the Dawson Great Lakes Museum and the Coast Guard station there. It's a square pool in the ground. It's got kind of like a cinder block or stone edges around it. You generally don't see too many people racing model yachts there anymore. That's kind of an old-timey thing, but believe it or not, my dad has brought his old one out there from time to time to do a little spin across the pool there. So if you do see anybody, say hi, because maybe it's him. This is a great time to mention that too, because currently at the Dawson Great Lakes Museum, we have an exhibit up of almost all the model ships in our collection, and all different types, from, you know, artistic models or to working models like these model yachts. And we have a whole wing of one of our cases with these pond yachts on display. And when the sun goes down, we can't forget about the submarine races. Although these days, I think they boot you off the island around 10 o'clock. I joke, but we really did have submarines in Detroit. It's kind of our own version of McHale's Navy, right over at the Broadhead Naval Armory, just opposite Belle Isle. Never did see those guys racing though. And as another plug for the Dawson, you can of course find the periscope to one of the submarines that was stationed in Detroit, the USS Tambor, set up in the Dawson Great Lakes Museum, so you can make sure there's no U-boats coming down the Detroit River there. The USS Tambor served in Midway. In addition to the Tambor, there was some other subs that were stationed over at Broadhead at various times, like the Ciro and the Amherst. So one of the constants on Belle Isle is, of course, the family reunion. They're constantly going on there, and family get-togethers and picnics and things like that are well represented in our collection here. And we've got a nice spread of photos from our collection, ranging from kind of the era of the straw boater hats to the nice plaid pants here. And of course, we've got more modern ones to show too. Go to Belle Isle any given day or any given weekend, and there's surely one of the shelters will be a bunch of folks with matching family reunion shirts there. It's a great thing to see. So let's dive into the island's early history. The native Chippewa or Ojibwa and the Ottawa or Odawa populations knew the island as Swan Island. When the British arrived in the area, they purchased the island in 1768, and the purchase was negotiated by a guy by the name of Lieutenant George McDougall. And this is the, in the image here, we've got the original deed and the wampum belt that was part of that transaction. And these are both in the collection of the Burden Historical Collection over at the main branch of the DTL. In addition to the belt, the transaction included 8 barrels of rum, 3 rolls of tobacco, 3 pounds of vermilion dye, 3 pints of paint, and the belt. So Lieutenant George McDougall was orchestrating this sale on behalf of the British Crown. This was kind of an official purchase. It moved into private hands in 1793 when it was purchased by a guy by the name of William Macomb, who paid about $100,000 in today's money. Macomb was a big property owner on both sides of the river, and I would be remiss to note that property in this era includes not only land but people. Macomb, as we would pronounce his name now, was one of the largest slave owners in the region here. You might be more familiar with William's nephew, General Alexander Macomb, to use the more modern pronunciation of his name, who was in the War of 1812. And he's the guy in the statue on Washington Boulevard, downtown with the big cape and all that, and is the namesake of Macomb County. In 1817, Macomb's heirs then sold the island to another private individual, a guy by the name of Barnabas Campo. Barnabas Campo is the younger brother of Joseph, for any of you familiar with Hamtramck's main thoroughfare. And that transaction was for $92,000 in today's money. In 1879, the city of Detroit comes into the picture, and they purchased the island for about $5 million in today's money, and they budget 3 times that for buildings, bridges, and other improvements. So what was going on the island in these days? Well, one of the things, about to say Bablo, that's a whole different presentation. One of the things Belle Isle was known for in these days was that it was a popular spot for dueling. It was in the river. It was kind of outside the purview of authority. People would come from Malden, or Amherstburg as we know it today. They'd step away from the authorities and settle their business on the island at 20 paces and pistols. A well-known one was in 1820, when there was a guy by the name of Arthur Rankin who had a bit of a reputation as a drunken lout. He got into a quarrel with a guy by the name of Henry Richardson, who had a bit of a reputation as a lawyer. And they set out to Belle Isle to settle it like quote unquote gentlemen. Rankin ended up winning, although Richardson did survive. Right. Now, it wasn't all just duels and stuff on the island. For the most part, it was a place of tranquility and industry. We've got an image of the Robert Hopkin painting here, Comment ça va? French essentially for how you doing? The 3 in the canoe in the foreground are farmers out to sell produce to passing ships. In the background, we see Belle Isle. And if you look right on the tip of the island, you see a bit of a red blur. There's buildings on the island. There's actually some structures on the island, including even a tavern on the eastern tip at the time. The island was, in a lot of ways, a working place. It was home to 3 different fisheries. Fish would be caught and stored in pens on the island until they needed to be shipped out. In winter, workers would harvest and store blocks of ice to supply the city during the hotter months. And of course, being covered with trees, it was also the home to logging operations. And Belle Isle really could have remained sort of an industrialized spot, sort of an extension of the city's riverfront. Early on, there were plans to run a railroad tunnel under the river. And the spot they thought to do it. And again, I don't know if this is coming through, but my cursor there, if you look closer to downtown, almost where the automotive tunnel is now, you see a banded tunnel on the map that should be up on your screen right now. Workers started to dig a railroad tunnel under the Detroit River direct, and they ran into gas pockets and had to abandon the plan. So they went back to the drawing board and they said, instead of running that single longer tunnel across the river, they could do run a short tunnel from kind of the far end of Belle Isle there and have a bridge connecting it to the mainland of Detroit. And they'd have a switching yard on the island. And that's what this 1874 map here shows. There'd still be some concessions though on the island. There'd still be a beach, but there would have been an asylum and a quarantine hospital. So not quite the the getaway we know it today. But luckily for us, the City Beautiful movement was gaining steam in this period. And the aim of that, the City Beautiful movement, was to kind of set off the ills of industrial cities with parks and beautiful architecture. And Detroit was one of the places that this movement took root. In fact, the city set up a Parks and Boulevards Commission to pursue this. And one of their initial contributions, because of their name, was it sounds like Belle Isle's getting industrialized right there. The Parks and Boulevard Commission, one of their first contributions was Grand Boulevard, which was, in kind of modern parlance, was sort of a green space, a belt encircling what were at that point the city limits. It was too late to do anything with a riverfront in terms of the City Beautiful movement, though. Unlike a lot of other cities that maintained riverfront parks, ours was warehouses and factories going back pretty early on. It's only really been it's been kind of a dream of much of the 20th century, but it's only really been the last couple of decades that we started to undo this with I guess we go back even further to Park Plaza and the Riverfront Park before that, but with like Shane Park in the 1980s, and that gave way to the Riverwalk more recently. So without the riverfront to be sort of this getaway that the City Beautiful beholders of the City Beautiful movement wanted to create, they looked at Belle Isle instead. And to do this, they initially hired Frederick Law Olmsted of New York Central Park fame to do this, one of kind of the big names in the City Beautiful movement. There was some pushback though. Some people argued that Belle Isle was too far out of town. Remember I said Grand Boulevard was the outskirts right there. And the streetcars of the day only went as far as Mount Elliott. So you had another half mile to hoof it to get over to the, if you're lucky, I guess hoofing it literally back then, but probably on foot, to get to the ferry dock. And of course, yeah, this is a ferry dock. There's no island yet. You'd have to hop on the ferry or have your own boat to get the island. So people are worried that this would only benefit wealthy folks who had the time and the boats to easily get there and the money to get there. But of course, the aim of Olmsted and the City Beautiful movement was to create a natural paradise in the city that could be enjoyed by factory workers and the wealthy alike. And we've got a quote to that effect from Olmsted here. We want a ground in which people may easily go after their day's work is done, and where they may stroll for an hour, seeing, hearing, and feeling nothing of the bustle and the jar of the streets. And his philosophy was very much for this natural paradise. In fact, when he drew up his plan for Belle Isle, he said that he wanted to keep it kind of as raw as possible. He didn't want, a lot of fancy manicured flower beds and things like that, because, it was felt that natural beauty was more beneficial to sort of, the artifice of gardens and all that. And it was also cheaper. He wanted to keep this affordable for the city. So in his proposal, he said that the city should avoid things like dance houses, racetracks, museums, and collections of zoology and horticulture on the island. And that's pretty much Belle Isle in a nutshell now. So how do things deviate from Olmsted's vision? And well, it began pretty quickly. Here is the 1882 survey of Belle Isle. So this is kind of not quite a blank slate, but this is what Olmsted was working with here. And this was undertaken by a surveyor by the name of Eugene Robinson. It was published out of Boston. So it's very likely that this is the exact concept of the island Olmsted was working with for his process here. In fact, Olmsted only visited Belle Isle once during his planning process, and it was a bit of a disaster. He got there kind of late. He couldn't hop on a ferry. He had to pay a guy to get his rowboat to paddle himself over there. So kind of setting things off on the wrong foot from the get-go. But like I said, this isn't really a blank slate. You can see some roads, some farms, some wetlands, and even a dock. If you look at the what would be the western tip of the island there, it looks almost like a face smoking a pipe there. That's the ferry dock on the edge there. You also notice that this looks completely different shape-wise, the footprint-wise, to what Belle Isle we know today. We'll get to that soon enough. So Olmsted drew up a plan. But he ran into issues with city council. He didn't agree with the way that taxes were being levied to finance the project, and generally had a bad time with it. And he said that that there was a more hesitating and distrustful disposition towards the park undertaking than any other city he had worked with at that point. And handed in his plan and walked away to work on the World's Fair in Chicago, and probably had a great time with that and quickly forgot any of the troubles with Belle Isle. But he did indeed draw up a plan. The city paid him $7 grand, and this is what he drew up. You'll notice some similarities to what we ended up with here. There's a big central avenue. Again, I don't know if my cursor's coming through, but right along there. There's a loop on the western tip, riding trails off to the east. The parade ground, kind of the big feature there, the big well-labeled feature there, are roughly where the athletic fields are now. And landfills are used to build up the island and fill in the lagoons. There's also a covered dock, probably the most substantial structure that he called for along that western tip. There's a beach, and the fishery is still on here. So let's look a little closer here. Let's see some of the, so it does look, it's not totally natural. I mean, we've got, these uniform paths and stuff, but it's not quite what it turned into here, which I think would have shocked Olmsted. So let's do the transition here. Oh, this is where doing the slides in this view isn't going to work. There we go. Hey, look at that. We just move that for the time being. All right. Oh, it's going to come back. I'll hold it down here. So this is the in 1895. This is a view here along Central Avenue. But what's this? Right in the foreground, there's a big flower arrangement. So it's not Olmsted's natural paradise. So again, elements of the plan were carried out. We've got Central Avenue, we've got the Eastern Trail and the Western Loop Canal that came in 1883. And the big parade ground became the athletic field. But walking paths were replaced by driving lanes. Natural planting was replaced by extensive flower beds, and the lagoons and the canals were all dug here. So it's almost like Olmsted provided the skeleton of the plan. And then others who will name soon enough came in and augmented it into the Belle Isle we know today. Let's go to the next one here. All right, so here's the boat livery. Olmsted did suggest a boathouse, and here's the one that was built. And this one, you'll notice, if you got a sharp eye for types of boats, we've got rowboats here. These aren't those canoes that you see in all the slightly later ones. Early on, rowboats were the way people got around, and those kind of fancy canoes with the phonographs and stuff in the back that show up in a lot of other images of the island, like the one we looked at the very start, came a little bit later. It's another great view. One of my favorite early images of the island here. The ferry dock was one of those rare parts of the plan where the final structure was a lot more restrained than Olmsted's concept. He had this big sprawling thing that went along the whole western tip of the island. If you look at the little plume of smoke there from the ferry, the actual ferry dock there is pretty much just a ferry dock there. You also see the first of the bridges to the island here. This particular one was a truss affair, as you can see it, and the decking on it was wooden. When it came time to retar the platforms in, I believe it was 1913, the cart that had the coals that were keeping the tar malleable hit a bump. Some of the coals fell out and the whole bridge burned down. Ended up being replaced with the current one we know. It's always kind of weird when we talk about the Belle Isle Bridge, because it's it was originally just the Belle Isle Bridge, and it got its current name after World War II, when it was named to honor General Douglas MacArthur. So for a long time, I was like, oh, it's the Douglas MacArthur Bridge. That must be from, the 50s or something like that. But the name came later. The bridge itself was built in the 20s. The other thing we can see in this kind of cool aerial view is the boat club. We have a different view of that coming up. So here is a fun old postcard. This is the old skating pavilion near where the present casino is. And you can see how popular this is. There's a more modern skating pavilion there, which is a neat piece of mid-century modern architecture. It's not quite as elaborate, but probably the one if you're on the call today and remember skating on there, that's probably the one you're more familiar with. But there's the balcony up top where a small orchestra could perform for everybody skating below. So it really kind of looks like a great fun time. Here we've got a view of the first Belle Isle Casino, and I always got to specify this isn't a place for gambling. That's just an old-fashioned word for a gathering place. When they replaced this casino with the current Belle Isle Casino, they actually toyed with the idea of moving this original structure somewhere else, even to the mainland. But of course, that didn't happen. This was kind of an interesting time for architecture in Detroit, because things were changing rapidly with electricity and things like that, that a lot of buildings had shorter shelf lives than ones that were built, slightly earlier, slightly later. And here's the bathing beach here. Got everybody lined up on the dock and the bathhouses back there. Get to that later. The old pavilions are still there and still for rent. This particular one, though, I believe is still, last time I was there, it was still covered in Tyvek and things like that. And I know they've been doing a lot of work on it over the years, because a couple years back, when I was started with the Detroit Historical Society, which is more than a couple years back now, I remember we got contacted looking for information about what paint color this pavilion was originally painted, because they wanted to match that when they restored it. I don't know if we helped them with that. I didn't know of anything. I still don't know of anything that explicitly spells that out. A lot of the postcards we have that are in color are hand colored, things like that, and the colors will vary pretty wildly from postcard to postcard. Here's one of the Detroit Boat Club buildings. This is, I believe, is the fourth of their locations. They went through a series of buildings. It started on the mainland, moved to Belle Isle, and this particular one actually burned down until they opted for the next one, the fifth, for the concrete design that still stands, and that's the boat club. Of course, when you're coming across the bridge on the immediate left there. And there's the Detroit Boat Club, and then there's the Detroit Yacht Club. The Yacht Club took over a building that was used by the old Michigan Yacht Club. And this particular one, where it's kind of on its own little island, like their current building is about where the beach and the pool and the little water slide and all that are now. Later, they moved to their own island a bit further east of this. And of course, they too went through a series of buildings and started out on the mainland. Detroit, despite Olmsted's wishes, there was also a zoo on the island. And this was the second zoo in Detroit. The first was appropriately enough near Michigan and Trumbull, where the lions and tigers were visible in a much different form decades later. And there's also some kind of interesting structures that are still on the island that a lot of people pass by and don't necessarily give too much thought to. I know I didn't for much of my life. On the right is the White House, or Insel Rua. It was originally the residence of one of the Campo family, and now it's the park offices. It's kind of tucked away. If you're looking for it, it's kind of tucked away next to the back of the aquarium. And you know, those greenhouses that you're always, if you're heading down that road there, the greenhouses that are opposite the aquarium, that's behind those. And on the other side of those is the dairy barn here. Dairy barn, I always just thought it was part of the zoo because it kind of matches the zoo's architecture, at least the zoo as I knew it, the Safari Land Zoo of the 80s. But this was actually a dairy barn. It got a nice restoration job by the oh no, I'm blanking on the name, City Club of Detroit. The original concept was that it was to be a dairy barn. The city would kind of raise cows and raise some extra cash off of the park here. So had we stuck with Olmsted's vision, we wouldn't have so many great examples by important Detroit architects on the island. Albert Kahn is, of course, you know, the biggest name in Detroit architecture, and he gave us the conservatory and the aquarium both early in his career. And the conservatory and the aquarium are actually connected. Last time I was in there, they were working on uncovering the little door that leads between them. That might have actually happened since I don't think I've been there in the last year and a half or so. I'm sorry, Kahn also did the Art Deco Livingston Lighthouse, which is the country's only marble lighthouse on the eastern tip of the island. And it's not pictured here, which I guess is in my power. I ought to add it. But he also designed the Reverend Samuel Francis Smith Memorial Flagpole over by the athletic field. So kind of outside the usual purview of what you think for Albert Kahn, which I guess a lot of this stuff is if you primarily think of him for industrial architecture and things like that. Interesting thing about the conservatory is the central dome, as it was originally built, was supported by lumber, and that was replaced with the steel beams we have now pretty early in. Van Leyen and Schilling were behind the present casino, which was built in 1908. One of those guys also had some family ties to that Parks and Boulevard committee, so. Not saying anything shady was going on there, but that's a lead I've always wanted to follow and see how that exactly played out there. George Mason did the Detroit Yacht Club, and he's also the man behind the Masonic Temple. And they're both beautiful structures. If you ever can get an excuse to check out the Detroit Yacht Club, it's a fantastic building. Alphinus Chitterdam gave us the Detroit Boat Club, and we would be remiss if we didn't mention that William Knapp designed the Dawson Great Lakes Museum. And he's also the guy behind the Detroit Historical Museum, City Airport, Komyung Airport, the Players Club, and the Scarab Club. So kind of a wide array of buildings. I always thought the Dawson Great Lakes Museum looked like kind of the world's coolest like middle school. And to have that guy also behind, you know, something like the Scarabs Club is kind of wild. All right, I apologize for the way I'm presenting this. We're seeing William Ferguson a little bit earlier than I like to unveil him in the presentation here. So who built the lagoons? A lot of people say they're an Olmsted thing, but as you saw before, he filled in kind of the water features that were there. The route of the Belle canals, as we know them today, goes back to a guy by the name of Michael J.D., who was a Detroit news editor. And he pushed for them as a way to give people a way to get around the island to, you know, you want to be able to leisurely paddle around, but you don't want to be out in the currents. with, you know, those early freighters going by, and you know, it can be kind of a bit not relaxing to say the least. So if there was canals, things that were inland, things that were slower, things that were, you know, kind of protected from all the traffic that was on the river back then, that would be a proper relaxing experience befitting Belle Isle. So in order to realize this, he enlisted a man by the name of William Ferguson, who actually had worked with Homestead in New York. He's primarily a horticulturalist. I think he had a flower store at one point in Eastern Market, but he also delved into landscaping, and he was appointed superintendent of the island. And here's a quote to that effect about how much influence he exercised in this role as superintendent on shaping the island. So when Mr. Ferguson was appointed superintendent of Belle Isle Park in 1887, he prepared the present comprehensive plan. He turned mosquito breeding grounds into pretty lakes, ran fine drives through what had been wilderness, established flower beds, changing the plants with the seasons. All those things Homestead would have hated. That's me, not the original quote. So in short, he changed Belle Isle from a wilderness to a place of blossoming beauty. And all this was done so quietly and unostentatiously that many of Belle Isle's thousands of visitors did not know him by sight. But thanks to this, looks like almost like a police composite here, you kind of know him by sight. So that's William Ferguson there, the first park superintendent. But you know, really, the kind of the smart alecky and perhaps truest answer to who built the lagoons are these guys in the background in the photos. They were dug by hand, and this is, you know, the circa 1898 here. This is the era of Pinker's potato patches. Folks are, you know, literally hungry for employment, and there was a lot of labor that went into doing this. So going back to William Ferguson, of course, as superintendent, he got to live in Solrua in the White House. We've got a view of it here, circa 1900, another postcard view. And I like to think that maybe this kid in the foreground that managed to, you know, imagine that being like the kid that, you know, gets memorialized standing in a photographer's view for a postcard. It's got to be staged, you know. But I like to think that maybe this kid that got this kind of prominent view in this postcard is William Ferguson's son, George. George Ferguson wrote a great memoir about growing up on the island, which his family later donated to the Historical Society, or donated a copy of at least. And, you know, like I said, it was one of the perks of being the park superintendent that you got to live in the White House. So George grew up there, and he writes about kind of all the things you'd want to hear about growing up in Detroit. First of all, in this time period, he talks about shopping at, you know, J.L. Hudson's clothing store in the Detroit Opera House, and then kind of his weird spin on it, which was growing up on this island here. He had a boat that he had to, you know, partially rely on to get around, and partially got to enjoy. There's a quote in that memoir that during the summer months of my life it was almost a continual round of pleasure. I had a good rowboat and a sailboat and a horse to drive. So sounds pretty idyllic, but it wasn't all idyllic. He also talks about going out in his sailboat to try and impress some girls with his sailing prowess, but promptly ended up capsizing in the river. And you know, as cool as it sounds, I don't know, you know, walking uphill to school both ways is a lot, but imagine you having to paddle to school every morning. That's a lot. Little George wasn't the only person in the Detroit River those days. The Detroit River was one of the busiest waterways in the world around the turn of the century. In 1907, in fact, the Detroit River carried more tonnage than the ports of London and New York combined. It wasn't coming into Detroit, it was passing through, but you know, we were you know, an important juncture on goods moving through the Great Lakes. Lots and lots of freighters coming by. And with lots of commerce going on around us, of course, the city itself was also growing. And the island was poised to grow as well. So here we have a chart of the Detroit River and Belle Isle from about 1900 here. And as you can see here, Belle Isle was surrounded by shallows, which made it easy for the island to grow and expand as the 20th century crept forward. On the mainland, buildings were being built, which means a lot of foundations were being dug out. And what do you do with that dirt? Well, as the story goes, if you're the then commissioner of Parks and Boulevards, a guy by the name of Colonel Edward G. Heckel, use it to expand Belle Isle. This is when the Detroit Yacht Club gets its own island and when the tips of the island get built out. So as we do the transition here, take a look at those kind of extremities of the island here. So we're jumping from around 1900 here all the way to 1948. Belle Isle now comes to kind of a sharp point on the western tip. The eastern side's a bit more built out there. So here's, the island in 1948 as depicted in this directory map. We've got a list of about 100 attractions on the island here. So 100 things that Olmsted would have hated. But regardless, he kind of laid the groundwork for. The Livingston Lighthouse, the water and surge department's intake, and the sprawling Scott Fountain are all in place now. And the Scott Fountain gets to one of my favorite stories here. James Scott, the namesake of the Scott Fountain, was a very rich but very unliked, hated, unpopular Detroiter. He inherited a lot of his money from his father. He's known for gambling and being kind of a unpleasant guy. There's even a story that he hated kids so much that he built a wall as part of his mansion on Peterborough, specifically to cast a shadow over an adjacent yard where kids played. And as a kid that went to school across from what was left of the Scott Mansion over at Burden School, I can kind of relate to those poor kids that, so they say, he kind of blotted out the sun on their yard. That's one of those stories that sounds kind of too good or too evil to be true. So I don't know if I necessarily buy it, but the fact that this sort of story was circulating about the guy gives you an idea of how people thought about him. When James Scott died, didn't have any heirs. So he willed his money to the city, which seems kind of magnanimous. But he willed it in such a way that it was to be used to build a monument to him. Nobody was really eager to do this. So the folks on the Common Council invested the money. So what started out as a big pot of money to build this monument for Scott turned into an even bigger pot of money. And eventually they came up with an idea. And the idea was this kind of massive fountain complex on the western tip of the island, where there is a statue of James Scott. It's bigger than life size. It's a impressive statue, but given the scope of the grounds, it's kind of dwarfed compared to everything else. One of the things that I always get a kick out of is almost every time I'm visiting the Scott Fountain, there's some kids climbing on the James Scott statue there. So he would have loved that. That's not even to get in what the pigeons are doing to him. So, all right. So here we have a shot from the 1950s. I think we actually narrowed this down to like between like January and March of 1950 here, because of the combination of the weather and what is and isn't on the island here. As you can see, it's really there's some new features here. Down at the bottom center, the old sailing ship, the JT Wing, has been brought in to house the Maritime Museum of the Great Lakes, the forerunner of the Dawson Great Lakes Museum. The JT Wing was the last operating commercial sailing ship on the Great Lakes. It had a really kind of varied career. It was a Sea Scouts training vessel for a time. It underwent some name changes. It was sunk twice, I believe. I think the second time was intentional. They would do that to store boats from time to time. As you keep them wet, they stay preserved. But when you take them out of the water, say you take them out of the water, you put it on a little island, you fill it with artifacts, that hull begins to rot. If you look at images of it, you can kind of see that it looks like its back is broken there. So the structure got essentially condemned, and it had one last job, which they did in kind of a very grandiose way. They turned it into a fire department training scenario, and to do this, they actually fired at the boat with a Tommy gun to ignite it, which feels like a bit. Somebody was I think just taking advantage of their station to be able to do that. We also see the Nancy Brown Peace Carolyn in this view here. Nancy Brown is kind of the anti-James Scott. She was a beloved but very secretive Detroit news advice columnist who hosted an annual prayer service on the island. And of course, we see the Ann Scripps Whitcomb Conservatory with the folk gardens and all that here. And we've got the very small up at the top there, we've got the modern bridge. So these ideas to keep evolving Belle Isle, even though that looks almost like where we're at today, minus the Dawson Great Lakes Museum, folks continue to have kind of grand ideas for the redevelopment of Belle Isle. This is a plan from the 1970s, and this kind of radically reconfigures the island. For one, the beach gets moved to the Canadian side, and the current location where the beach is gets replaced by a marina, which is kind of cool. We've never had a public marina on the island here. There's also a bigger nature center. The area with the conservatory and aquarium and the Dawson gets a restaurant and a concert hall. The casino is gone and replaced with a visitor center closer to the entrance. It kind of makes sense. There's also expanded sports facilities over by the athletic field there. One thing I like is that the good old model yacht basin, despite all the other changes, is still here too. So I like that they found a home for that. This, of course, didn't happen, but that doesn't mean that folks didn't stop dreaming. This is a plan from 2000 that was revised in 2006, and this was actually the plan that the city was operating under until the state took over. The big realized aspect of this plan are the fishing piers that showed up on the island, I believe around 2001 or so. I think that was sort of popped up around the same time as the tricentennial. We've got a close-up view of the 2000 plan here, and you can see how kind of grandiose it did get here. This is a detail of that Carolyn in the conservatory area. And you can see that, you know, of course, that's not the JT Wing up there. They have a whole new tall ship docked over at the Dawson. They've got a big entrance building for the conservatory grounds. Even looks like the aquarium itself is almost double the size there. Would have been great if it did transpire, but of course it was not to be. One of the more out there plans is this one. This is a redevelopment plan from 2012. And this, of course, was when the city was in its hour of need budgetarily. And a developer came up with this plan to turn Belle Isle into almost like it's like a Hong Kong like sovereign island off the shore. I don't know how that would work international law wise, and I don't know how that would work foundation wise, because this kind of a fancy hotel complex, I think that the water table is usually I would say about a foot under surface level there, but I think it's a lot higher these days. You know, these days you need a park pass to get on the island, but if you need this, you'd have to have your passport, presumably. So, but you know, hey, I guess you can't fault somebody for thinking big, as wild as that is. And folks have been thinking big for a good long time, like literally big. Really dramatic plans aren't a new thing. For the city's bicentenary in 1901, it was proposed that a 200-foot tall column would be put as on the west side of the island. kind of in that space where they later built to build the Scott Fountain. It would have been surrounded by this very classical colonnade. And it kind of, in a weird way, invokes Olmsted's old dock complex that ran across that whole tip there. The weird thing is, if this thing looks familiar, it's because it was actually built, but it wasn't built in Detroit. This is another one of those postcards of things and buildings that they had a great image on that they slapped on a postcard, but didn't actually transpire. The real one is in Put-in Bay, and that's the Perry's Victory Monument down there. So another thing that Ohio ended up with that was almost in Detroit, just like Toledo there. Now, of course, things weren't always, Belle Isle saw its share of turmoil into the 20th century as well. During World War II, the military used the island to practice amphibious assault drills. So kind of echoes of Omaha Beach off of the Belle Isle Beach there. During World War II, one of the most notorious incidents to happen on Belle Isle occurred in 1943. The weather was hot. Detroit's population was outgrowing the availability of housing, with all the folks coming in for the wartime labor, arsenal democracy. And folks did what they always did on hot days. They escaped to Belle Isle. It was common to sleep out on Belle Isle even when it was really hot. The tensions of the time, though, proved inescapable, and the 1943 race riot broke out, beginning on the island. Rumors spread that, depending on who you asked, an African-American woman was tossed off the bridge by a white mob, or a white woman was tossed off the bridge by an African-American mob. Neither happened, but that didn't stop the fighting from spilling off the island and onto the mainland, like we see here with this image of a man getting yanked off of a streetcar. After the violence, the Detroit police began training on the island. We've got a view of a phalanx here afterwards. Jumping forward a bit to 1967, probably not where you're thinking I'm going. There was the Love-In riot on Belle Isle. The incident that no one remembers, or as they say, if you do, you weren't really there, I guess. WABX and things like that. The radio station used to host like kite flies and love-ins and stuff on the island. And that summer, there was a love-in on the island. There was the bands played, I think like SRC and the Frost were there. The partying also attracted a local biker gang who happened to get into it with the kind of hippie contingent of the folks there. And the police made the decision to essentially kettle the situation. They shut down the Belle Isle Bridge. So folks were trapped on the island. We've got, folks kind of escaping onto the roof there. Now moving a bit later that summer, during the more widely known 1967 riot or rebellion or uprising, a month later, Detroit's old bathhouse was used as a makeshift jail to hold the people who were getting rounded up. It was because of all the arrests, people were getting detained in buses or in garages and things like that. So one of the spots that they activated to do this was the Belle Isle bathhouse. And not too long after, the bathhouse was actually demolished. I don't know if that kind of association fed into that, or if it was an old building at that point. Might have been sort of the same thinking that went into that. But a lot of the people who were around during that area, the bathhouse was associated with being used as this kind of makeshift jail. But by and large, the good days outnumber the bad on Belle Isle. And this, to kind of pay off on something I mentioned at the outstart here, is that view if those women on the bridge in the first slide had turned around of the band shell, on the river there. I don't know, are we able to take questions? Is that? Am I?
Oh, yeah, I just had to unmute myself. Sure. if you
Okay.
can-
I-
There's a couple of things in the chat here.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Let me see.
Yeah, somebody says, where did the tufa rock come from in the conservatory?
You know, that's a really good question. I actually don't know.
That's why they asked it to show off.
That's yeah. No, that's I'm glad.
And somebody mentions the Battle of the Bridge. I think that was with the race ride of 1943.
I believe so. Yes.
Can you maybe give us a little more detail about that?
Oh, it's hard. Oh, well, the fighting traveled along the bridge onto the mainland. There was geez, off the top of my head, I feel horrible. Like there was a number of fatalities and a good number of fires and things like that. I don't have the number on the top of my head. And I hate to hazard a guess right now, but it was yeah, pretty ugly incident there.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any other questions. Does anybody have any questions?
Did you unmute yourself?
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay. Jamon, I'm happy. I guess, you know, this is always kind of the built-in thing, and I'm interested. It's always like, you know, when this comes up, it's an interesting thing. The Il de Cocan there. One of the stories about Belle Isle has to do with its name, and the story that I was brought up with, and a lot of other folks I'm sure heard, was that the island was originally known as Snake Island, and that when the French came along, they brought in pigs to stomp out the snakes. That's the Ile de Cocan. I believe that's the island of the pigs. I've been trying to like figure out the story, the kind of origin of that. I think as best as I can tell, and Jamon, you might be well ahead of me on this, it is that it seems to show up in the 1800s. And I'm not sure if it was kind of I've kind of under the belief it was a bit of a fanciful story, but it is one of those ones that's kind of been in the popular imagination, and it's almost built into this that this comes up every Q&A session. So I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah, you were right earlier when
Okay.
you stated that it was Swan Island, Wannabeezy.
There we
So it
go.
was Swan Island, but there is this legend that the French brought pigs onto the island to eat up the snakes, and that's really not true. It's just a myth. I grew up learning the same thing. I heard the same thing, but in reality, what it was, the French did store pigs on the island.
Yes.
And those pigs did eat the native snakes, but they didn't put the pigs on the island to eat the native snakes. It's just that pigs eat everything, and so they did name it Hog Island or Pig Island, or as you stated with the French pronunciation, which I can't do, but Ile au Cochon, which is of course Hog Island or Pig Island. So Louis de Quindère would be the person who established it as a place to store pigs, and he gave it that French name, which it would have for a while, until the Campo family renamed it Belle Isle.
Yes, thank you. And this, I guess, to run on this, the story I've heard about Belle Isle, and it seems like Belle Isle, I always just thought, you know, it's French beautiful. That it was there's a story that it was named to honor Louis Cass's daughter Isabella. And that's another one of those ones where it seems like it might be one of those sort of myths or something like that. It's a weird jump, but yeah, thank you so much for helping out. It's an honor to have you here. So
Jordan.
Let's see. There is a little bit more stuff in the.
Oh yeah, yeah. Okay, so geez, interesting one. The water table. I'm no architect, but I do know that when we built the when we did some renovations over at the Dawson Great Lakes Museum, we built that new little lagoon or inlet there. That was a whole back and forth because just during the planning of that, the water levels on the island were really changing. As I'm sure a lot of you remember in I think it was 2019, how the Carolyn was almost an island surrounded by water there. So that's the kind of pretty dramatically you can see the differences there. The willow trees along the edge of the conservatory grounds were sticking out of the water for a while. So, ooh, let's see. Where was the spirit tree on the island? That I'm actually not familiar with that one. That's kind of the thing I love about doing this is everybody brings something new. If is that Carol? If you wanted to.
Oh yeah, I had heard there was an African American spirit tree.
Really?
African American families came on the island and they would sit around the spirit tree, but no one knows where it was.
That I'm interested in. Yeah. Yeah, you've given me something to do some research on here. Yeah, I'm sorry I don't have any details there, but you've tapped into something that's a good mystery here. Let's see. Yes, the Great Bear, the People of the Three Fires origin story. I hate to butcher it, but the telling I remember is that the island was like the back of a sleeping bear, I believe. Let's see if I scroll past anything. Thank you for all the kind words, folks that chimed in with those. Anything else? Oh, here we go. Oh, wow. All right. Yeah, these Drew has a very interesting comment here about sort of race relations and integrated spaces or spaces of kind of racist incidents on the island here. I'm honestly not familiar with the canoe incident. That sounds like it's a definitely worth researching, though. And I'm like so many things, that seems like it should have a larger footprint in history, and like to bring that to life, bring that to light in my talk if I can. As far as the athletic competitions and things like that, I've heard too, yeah, that they were integrated. I don't know how those would occur in practice. We do have some newsreel footage of from the 20s of a kind of children's day, and you can see that the crowds in that are integrated, which is kind of fantastic for just footage from the 20s. The folks they were putting the cameras at weren't always representative of the folks who were actually out there. It's not up on our website yet, but that's one of the ones that will be uploaded soon. And the conflicts with the lifeguards, that's another one I am interested in reading about. I'm just going to copy and paste this so I can do some research. And I can even drop my email in the chat here. I can follow up with some of these too. Fantastic questions. These are honestly probably this is the best Q&A I've ever had. And I feel like it's the least answers I've had, but this is a really cool engaged crowd here. Anybody else? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brendan, for presenting on this, because we all love Belle Isle. It's great to hear all these stories about it.
One of my favorite spots. So and with the DPL being one of my other favorite spots in the city. So this is great to be able to do.
Sure, come visit us in person sometime.
I will. It's been a minute since I've been in there. So.
And Brendan, I can see you're a gentleman and a scholar.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I try to live up to both of those. So.
All right.
Okay, great. Does anybody? Oh, okay. When will we be able to get the recording? Well, it's gonna take a few weeks, but then we're gonna post it on our Detroit Public Library. I think we have a YouTube channel.
Oh, yeah.
Cool.
That's what we do.
Okay, if there's nothing else, I just want to thank everybody for attending, and thank you, Brendan, and everybody have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Then you hit the end button.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
yeah. Okay, good.
Okay, good night, everybody.
Get it.